Hey there, and welcome to Photoshop 301, Section 5 on 3D. In this section, we're going to show you how to use the 3D tools within Photoshop. Now, when it comes to 3D, a lot of people think about like video games and movies like Toy Story, where you've got characters actually like moving around and talking to each other, and there's really complicated 3D models, and you have backgrounds and things like that. And that is a really awesome use of 3D. Now, Photoshop is a lot more simple. So if you guys are interested in creating like movies and video games, there are actually much better programs for working in 3D. Those programs are like Maya and 3D Studio Max, which focus mostly on 3D. Now, Photoshop is basically like a photo editing and a graphics creation program. While it does have 3D, its capabilities are a lot more limited. So you can do simple things within Photoshop. So in this tutorial, we're going to show you all the Photoshop tools when it comes to 3D, but don't be expecting to go out and start working in Photoshop and then produce a movie like Avatar. That's just not going to happen, guys. But you can do really cool things, including 3D printing and creating some great graphics within Photoshop. So we're going to jump in and show you how to do both of those. So let's start off by opening up our images. We're going to hit Controller-Command-O to open. Now we've got here in our Photoshop 301, Section 5, here in our Images folder, let's go ahead and hit Controller-Command and open both of our TIFFs. All right. Now we're going to start off with our Flurn document here. So F for full screen. Okay, and we're going to start off by turning this layer into a 3D layer. So this is all you need. Basically, you can have any shape that you want. You can have text, you can have type, you can have a logo like this. You can turn all of that into 3D using what's called a 3D extrusion. So to get to that, simply go to Window and down to 3D. Okay, this is your 3D menu here. Next, we're going to go to Window and down to Properties. Okay, so these are kind of like they work together when you're working in 3D. Okay, so we're starting off with just this simple Flurn logo. In this case, it makes a lot of sense for me to use the Flurn logo. So what we're going to do is click on our layer here. And here in our 3D menu, we have a few different options. So we're going to start off here at our source. Okay, we're going to go to selected layers, but you can also do that with a current selection. You can create a 3D object from a file or a work path. In this case, we'll just go with the selected layers. Okay, now a 3D postcard, this is going to turn it into a flat 3D object. You can still rotate it around in space, but it's not going to have any depth. Okay, next we have our 3D extrusion. This is going to add depth to your 3D object. This is what we're going to be using most of the time. Okay, next we have our mesh from preset. And these are preset shapes here. So like cones and hats and pyramids and a soda can even. You can create all these presets within Photoshop. Okay, next you have a mesh from a depth map, which you can choose to have that be a plane, two-sided plane, a solid extrusion. All right, two-sided solid extrusion, a cylinder, and a sphere. Okay, and then we have a 3D volume as well. Now, in this case, we're going to be working with a 3D extrusion. Okay, so this is what I would recommend. When working in Photoshop, most of the time, you're going to be creating 3D extrusions. And basically, that creates a flat shape like this and extrudes it out, gives it a little bit more depth. Okay, so here on our layer, we've got 3D extrusion selected. I'm going to hit Create. There we go. Now I've got basically a little message saying the document default ibl.tiff has an embedded color profile. We'll explain that in just a minute. For now, I'm going to go ahead and just convert that to our working space. Okay, let's hit OK there. All right, if you don't see that message, don't worry about it. Now, it also totally changed my window, my workspace. So from window down to workspace, you can see it changed it to my 3D workspace. Now, I actually don't prefer my 3D workspace. We're going to go back to the Flurn workspace. All you need when working in 3D here is your 3D panel and your properties panel. That's all you need. And you can get to both of those by going to Window and 3D and Window and Properties, just like we clicked earlier. Okay, well, let's go ahead and click on this arrow. We're going to take a look at what is included within 3D in Photoshop. So basically, everything here makes up what's going on in Photoshop when it comes to 3D. Okay, so let's go ahead and start at the very top. First, we see our environment. Now, our environment, this is actually what is like lighting the entire scene. So earlier when it said there was a profile mismatch for the .ibl file, that's right over here. So basically, it's loaded a file that each one of these different lights here, these actually are lighting my scene. So you can load in images, for instance. If you, for instance, took like a 3D capture of a room and had that loaded in, you could actually light your scene with that image, which is pretty cool. Now, for default, we're just going to be using the IBL that's loaded in here. But basically, that stands for image-based lighting. I'm pretty sure it's image-based lighting. Basically, it just uses an image, and the lights and the darks light your image. Okay, now here you can change your color and your intensity. So this is how much light you're going to get on your entire image. Now, you can use lights in your image, okay? By default, you're going to have a light. In this case, we have this infinite light here, but this is basically like your ambient lighting. Think of this like ambient lighting. All right, and you also have shadows as well that you can create with your shadow lighting as well. Now, with your shadow, you can choose a softness level all the way up. It's going to make soft shadows, and here we have hard shadows. Okay, now your ground plane shadows, this is basically the shadows that we see here. Okay, you can choose the color. So for instance, I could click here and choose a red color. There we go. Now we can see we've got a red shadow underneath. Okay, let's go ahead and choose back to black. There we go. And you can choose your reflection color as well. Okay, so this is our environment. Now we're not going to be messing with our environment very much. Generally, it's pretty good to go as it is. All right, next we're going to go ahead and jump down into our scene. So with our scene, this is basically what makes up our 3D modeling scene. And we do have a couple of navigation tools and different options when moving around our scene. So let's go ahead and jump in and show you those. So clicked on scene here, we're going to take a look at our different 3D modes here at the very top. Now, we have orbit the 3D camera, roll the 3D camera, pan the 3D camera, slide, and zoom. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with our roll. So if I click here on my document, basically I'm moving around and I'm not moving my actual document. I'm not moving the Phlearn text here, okay? I'm moving my camera. So clicked on our scene, we're moving our camera. Now we can also rotate our camera if we want to. There we go. We can move our camera. Basically, we're just panning up and down, okay? We can zoom in and out. So if I want to really far zoom in on my letters, I can do that. There we go. And we can zoom in and out. Sorry, these are, let's hover over there. Slide and zoom. Well, basically they look about the same. Zoom is just going to allow you to move in and out. Slide will also allow you to do left and right. But you can zoom in and out with slide also. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and rotate that back around. All right. And we'll get back to our default and slide back out again. All right, there we go. And now we're going to move that back around as well. Okay, so basically this is how we view our 3D objects within Photoshop. Okay, so clicking on our scene here, we have a few different options up here with the properties of our scene. Okay, first starting off with our properties, we can choose to have our surfaces visible or not visible. We can have the lines. These are the actual like lines that make up your surfaces, visible and not visible, as well as our points. You can see in this case, there are many little points. You can kind of like see them there. Let's go ahead and zoom in, see if you can see the tiny little points here. These are basically just like points that make up your actual object here. So we're going to go ahead and turn those off. Now, next within our scene, we have our 3D printing view. Okay, so if you guys are interested in 3D printing, we're going to show you how to do that in a bit. Okay, and then you basically have your view here. We have our, there we go, panning. We have our rotation, okay, and we have scaling. Now in this case, there is no scaling for our scene, but we can go ahead and rotate, we can go ahead and reset both of these views. All right, and let's go ahead and zoom back out. All right, there we go. Oh, we seem to have lost our entire scene. Not a big deal. If you lose your entire scene, go to your current view. Here within current view, okay, you've got a couple of different options that you can choose. So you can go to your default camera, okay? There we go. You can choose to view this from the very top. You can choose this to view it from the right, and it's kind of a cool animation that it uses there as well. Vanishing point grid. We don't have a vanishing point grid, so we're not going to define one in this case. Let's just go to our default camera. So again, if you ever lose where you're at, just go to your current view, click on your little video camera here, and then you can click on default camera. Now you can actually change your field of view here. Okay, this is basically like if you guys are used to using like a camera, this is like basically zooming a lens. Okay, and you can also change your depth of field. So this would be like a 44mm lens in this case. All right, so generally what we'll do is we'll click on our default camera. There we go. And if we ever need to, for instance, we can click on the top. This helps with 3D modeling so you can see what things actually look like on the top. But let's get back to our 3D camera for now. Okay, so we've gone over our environment and our scene and our current view. Next, we're going to click on our infinite light. Now, within 3D, this is one of the huge advantages of working in 3D is you can actually define a light source. Now you can have your light shine from different directions and it's going to create highlights and shadows on your object. So let's go ahead and show you how to actually move a light around in three-dimensional space. So we want to start off by clicking on our infinite light, make sure that's selected here, and then we have our properties for our infinite light. So you can start to see how your 3D window and your properties window, they kind of go hand in hand here. All right, cool. Next we're going to click on our rotate tool, rotate in 3D. And here we can start to see that my light is actually rotating. There we go. It's rotating and moving the shadows in my image. Now, in this view, it's not incredibly clear. Let's go back to our current view. Okay, still on our rotate tool, we're just going to move our view a little bit so we can start to see what we're doing. So again, if you're on your current view, you're going to rotate your view. If you're clicked on your light, you're going to rotate your light. Okay, pretty cool. So you can light from behind. There we go. From in front. All right, and you can see it's actually going to be casting shadows in a realistic manner. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at our intensity. So this is basically how bright this light is. There we go, lighter and darker. We have our shadow, which we can turn off and on, and then we can have it create soft shadows or hard shadows. Now, keep in mind, the softer your shadows go, if you do decide to render this out, which we're going to show you how to render in just a little bit, if you do decide to render, this is going to really increase your render time because it has to calculate all these shadows. So right now it's like it doesn't look like it's really slowing things down, but that's because this is not a rendered view. Okay, this is a very rough view. So if you want your render to be quick, go ahead and make your shadow softness down. But in this case, we'll go ahead and bring it up a little bit. All right, something like that. I think looks pretty good. Okay, now we have a few different presets when it comes to our light. So preset here, we have a lot of different things. We can click on daylights, for instance. Okay, this is going to add a few lights. So you can see in this case we have 3 infinite lights here. Okay, each of which we can turn on and give each of those shadows. All right, now we have 3 shadows here with 3 infinite lights. Okay, preset we could click on purple phase, for instance. All right, and then we've got 2 lights, each of which is a purple light. Okay, and that's what's lighting our scene. All right, a lush lighting. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 lights here, and each of which are blue and green. Okay, so let's go ahead and move it around and see how this is actually lighting our image. Okay, now most of the time you're not going to be clicking on our, on these presets. Okay, again, I mean you totally can. It's cool to have a preset that creates lights that are warm and cool and things like that. But most of the time when working in Photoshop, I think it makes a lot more sense to just have a standard light. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and delete one of our lights. All right, this one we're going to take our color and we're just going to go right back down to gray. Okay, and you can still change your intensity here and change your shadow. Now we also have a few different types of lights within Photoshop. All right, let's go ahead and bring these up just a little bit here. So our types of lights, we have an infinite light. Okay, and think of this as like a sun. Okay, it's like it's coming from the same direction, it's infinite, and it's equally bright from left to right. Next we have a spotlight. Okay, now our spotlight, in this case I can't even see my spotlight. Let's go ahead and reset where our spotlight is, because you can see it's way down here. So our spotlight basically, there we go, let's see if it starts to light my model. No, it's too far away. All right, our spotlight basically lights, creates like a spotlight, like if we were on a stage. Now to reset where our spotlight is, simply go to your location here, okay? And we're going to go to reset coordinates. There we go. And now it's reset where our spotlight is. Okay, So let's go ahead and click on our spotlight, and we can start to change around where our light shines on our image. There we go. Now we can move this around. Okay, I'm going to click on my current view here and see why is my spotlight not shining on my letters. It's because it's actually below my letters. So let's click on our spotlight here. Let's make sure to move this up. There we go. Click on our spotlight. You can use these arrows. There we go. To make sure it moves. Now, sometimes it can be confusing because on this view, it looks like it should be lighting my letters, right? Well, that's why we have a few different presets within our view. So let's click on current view. I'm going to click over here to top. Okay, top, and then we're just going to zoom out. Okay, because I'm like, where is my spotlight? It's over there. Okay, so let's go to our spotlight here. Okay, we're going to use the move tool with our spotlight, and I'm just going to move my spotlight around. There we go. And let's go ahead and move it. Now you can start to see, oh, okay, cool. It is actually shining on my Flirn letters now. And you can see there's the shadow. Now you can change your width here of your spotlight. All right, there we go. Let's go ahead and click on our angle. There we go. And we have our hotspot angle as well. Now we can click on our current view and simply move our current view around. Okay, cool. And there we can start to see now our spotlight actually is shining on our Flirn. There we go. Let's go ahead and click here on our spotlight again. Okay, we can change our cone angle. So click on your spotlight, go right here, and we can change our cone angle. This is basically how much fall off we have with our light. And we have our hotspot angle as well. There we go. That looks pretty cool. And we can change and rotate our, let's click here, we can rotate our actual light as well. So we can have this point. Let's go back to our current view. All right, so we can have this point. Let's click on our, there we go. Right here in the center, and here are rotation tools. So you can have this point wherever you want on your 3D object. Okay, and you can see it is creating a shadow on the 3D object as well. All right, now within these tools, you see we have a few different options here. So our first option here is our rotate. If you hover over, you'll see a round icon. Okay, that's going to allow you to rotate. You have X, Y, and Z. So 3D contains X axis, Y axis, and a Z axis. Okay. Next we have our move. All right. So we can move this on an X axis, Y axis, and Z axis as well. There we go. That looks pretty cool. And in this case, we don't have scale, but when it comes to objects, we will have scale. So we'll show you how to do that in just a minute. All right. Let's go back to our current view and use our rotate view tool. There we go. That looks kind of cool. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more. All right. And rotate that back around. So we have Flirn, and let's go ahead and pan that over there. Okay. Now, in this case, that looks pretty cool. Let's say we're done. We're like, man, I'm a 3D master. I want to see what this actually looks like because right now we just have a rough view. I want to see what this actually looks like when rendered out. So now we're going to show you how to render. Keep in mind here, Photoshop takes a long time to render. So this is something you can hit render and go out, hang out with some friends for a bit, and then come back and see how it renders. So we'll go ahead and show you how to render in Photoshop. Okay, so here within your 3D menu, this is your render icon right here. Okay, you can see it's going to say render here. This is right over here as well, and you can go to 3D and all the way to render 3D layer, or you can render this entire document to a file. So let's go ahead and render this 3D layer. Now rendering basically calculates your light source. Okay, it's going to try to figure out what's going on with your light source here. It's going to try to figure out what's going on with your objects, and basically creates a bit more of a refined version of your image. So you see these like blue squares that are kind of like calculating around my image. Okay, and that's basically trying to figure out, okay, what would this image actually look like? All right, and this will take as long as you give it, basically. Renders take over 10 minutes most of the time. Okay, so in this case, you can hit escape and it's going to stop rendering. Okay, now you could go ahead and save this out just like this. You could continue rendering simply like by clicking on this button. But as soon as I click on my current view and I rotate it around, you're going to see I'm going to lose my rendered image. So as I start rotating this around, you're going to see I lose what I had there. Let's go ahead and click on our spotlight again, and this time I'm going to add a shadow here. So we're going to soften our shadow a little bit with our spotlight. You know what? Let's go ahead and turn our spotlight into a point light, okay, to show you the third type of light within Photoshop. All right, our current view here, let's go ahead and zoom out. There we are. Now let's click on our point light, and we can start to move our point light around. There we go. Let's make sure we're clicked on our point light. It can be kind of tough to actually select things in Photoshop when working in 3D. Just make sure you're hovered over, and it's going to say move on your y-axis or z-axis. All right, there we go. Move on z-axis. There we go. And we can move on our different axes. And if you click off something, like we're on our actual Phlearn letters now, you can just click back to point light, and it's going to make sure you're actually going to move onto your point light. Okay, so that's our point light. Let's go ahead and change, and again, you can change your color of your lighting here. If you want a red light, that's totally cool. You can do that. Most of the time, we're going to be using infinite lights in Photoshop. They're kind of the easiest lights to work with, okay? You can just kind of like move them around and change your direction here within, all right, within Photoshop. All right, cool. Now let's go ahead and choose a color. Maybe we want this to be a little bit warmer. All right, and we're going to make a soft shadow on there as well. So our current view, let's go ahead and rotate this around. All right, and zoom in. There we go. Zoom out just a little bit more. So we can see this rendered view doesn't look exactly how we want it. All right, because it's not rendered yet. So this is when we would click render. And this is when it starts to take the shadows into account, the highlights account. So you can see our fuzzy edges here, they go from looking like very kind of speckly, and they'll just kind of like refine more and more over time. Now, in a minute, we're going to take a look at actually assigning different materials to our Phlearn logo here. Right now, it just has a basic material set onto it. But you're going to see as it renders out, it's just going to continue to figure out, okay, this is what this looks like. And basically, the reason it takes a long time here is because it's doing what's called ray tracing, which is basically calculating like individual like photons, like little pieces of light that are like bouncing around the image and causing shadows and highlights. So it's a pretty intense thing for a computer to have to do. So it takes a little while. Okay, there you can see it's just kind of like, as it renders and renders, it's just like kind of refining it a little bit better each time. All right, let's go ahead and hit escape. Okay, that's going to stop your current render. All right, and then you can see as soon as I start to move it around, we now have a non-rendered version of it. Okay, which is totally okay. Okay, that looks great. Now, let's go ahead and click on our layer 1. So this is our layer here. Okay, this is our actual Phlearn word, and we can start moving this around. Now, our first property here, we can have this catch shadows and cast shadows. So if we want it to not cast shadows or cast shadows, we can have that be here on our options. We can have it be invisible, so you can have it just cast shadows if you want. Okay, you can choose your extrusion depth here. So, for instance, that may be something you really want. In this case, we're going to go quite a bit thinner. I think that looks a little bit more natural. Now, also, let's say, in this case, our Phlearn word is kind of like floating in the middle of nowhere, right? It's not anchored to anything, all right? So let's go over here to our actual coordinates here, all right? And we're going to reset and hit reset and hit reset. There we go. So this is going to give us basically completely reset. Now our document is not moving around at all. Now you can see it's actually kind of like floating in space a little bit, and the shadow is there. It's basically because it's kind of like floating here within our plane. Now, by default, I'm not seeing my actual plane here. If I want to see my 3D plane, simply go to Window, okay? Sorry, go to View, go to Show, and then we're going to go to 3D Ground Plane. There we go. So now we can see it's kind of like intersecting my 3D ground plane. So let's go ahead and I'm going to move this up a little bit. So here's our move here. All right, we're going to go ahead and click on our layer 1. All right, let's go ahead and start moving this up, and you can see how it's integrating with our shadows there. I'm going to go ahead and place this on the ground. So we're going to change our X angle, okay? Rotates your, all right, your 3D object. Let's go ahead and type 90. There we go. So it's going to put it flat, and I can also move this to the ground. So hit move to the ground, and it's going to automatically, make sure you hit enter there, move it to the ground, and it's going to put it on the ground, okay? So you can bring it above or below, but as soon as I hit move to the ground, it's going to be stuck on the ground there. So just keep in mind, if I'm on layer 1 and I'm using my rotate tool, it's going to start rotating my layer 1. Let's hit Command Z to undo that. If I'm on my current view, it's going to start rotating my current view. All right, that looks pretty good. Now in this case, let's go ahead and say like, okay, you know what? That was nice. I have a good idea of where my image is sitting on my 3D plane now. I want that to go ahead and go away, these grids. I find them to be a little bit distracting. So let's go to View. All right, we're going to go down to Show, and I'm going to go to our 3D ground plane. We're going to just turn that off real quick. Okay, now here in our current view, remember we can choose a lot of different views. So if I want to click on the top, there we go. Now I have a perfect top view of my Flurn. There we go. I can click on my infinite light here, and I can start moving my light around. So the Flurn word right now is sitting flat on the ground plane. Okay, our infinite light is casting a shadow. There we go. And our Flurn word is extruded as well. So let's go ahead and click this render button. All right, and see what this looks like. So for instance, this is like our first real example of something you might do, using a 3D extrusion to create like, something that looks like it's actually, kind of coming out of a piece of paper or a graphic, and you can even move it and scale it around to make it look like it's on a wall, for instance. All right, we're going to let that render for just a second and then come back to it when it looks a little bit more complete. All right, so our render just completed. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we got. So back in Photoshop, now you can see our render is a lot more clear. Now, in this case, I am selected on my layer. So if you see this little icon right here, this means you are selected on a 3D layer. So if I want to get out of my 3D view, for instance, I can see my light here, I can see all this 3D stuff here on the bottom, okay? If I want to get out of that, just simply click on a non-3D layer, and there we go. Now we're not looking at a 3D layer. So I can click on this layer, and I can group it with itself, Control or Command G to group that with itself. And then this is not a 3D layer as well, so I can move this around, and basically every time unfortunately when I move it around, I'm going to lose my rendering there. But basically now I can treat it like a regular layer. Okay, so whenever you are working in Photoshop in 3D, you can go ahead and render out your view, whatever you have, and then treat it like a regular layer. Now, if you are done with your layer and it is like, basically rendered out and everything like that, you can simply group it with itself and then hit Control or Command E, and then there we go. Now it's not a 3D object. Now it's just a totally regular layer. All right, let's hit undo a couple of times. We're going to take a look at our materials. Okay, we're going to take a look at our materials within Photoshop. All right, so let's go back to our current view here. All right, we're going to rotate our current view around. Here we go, looking good. Now I'm going to go back to our layer 1. All right. Go to our coordinates, and I'm going to type in 0 here. There we go, because I want this to stand up. Our infinite light in this case, let's go ahead and make sure it lights the front of our Flurn letters. All right, and here back on our current view. And you know what? I want to make sure we're actually raising this up a little bit. So let's go back to our layer 1. There we go, our coordinates. And I want to bring our Y coordinate. So we'll have it floating above our there we go, above our ground plane just a little bit. All right, now in this case, I'd actually like my current view. All right, let's go back to our camera here. I'd actually like my current view, let's go back to our scene. Sorry, there we go, our current view. I'd like this to be on our default camera. There we go. And my field of view, I'm actually going to change this because right now it's just a little bit too wide angle for me. A field of view of 38 millimeters. So let's go ahead and, there we go, make this like 98 millimeters. This is similar to what you would actually use on your camera. And then I'm going to zoom out. Okay, so it's just like it has a lot different perspective now instead of like looking so wide. There we go. just a little bit different. All right, and let's go ahead and move that over. Great. So we've gone over our environment, as well as our scene, our current view, and our layer. Now, let's go ahead and open up our layer. Now, you're going to see this is going to be like, whoa, that's a lot of stuff in there. Okay, basically, this is everything that Photoshop created in order to turn your logo or your text or whatever it is into an extrusion. Okay, basically, this is like you have your front. You can turn all of these off and on, by the way. Okay, so if you have like the front and the back of your objects, okay, each of those can have its own texture as well. So let's go ahead and click on our front inflation material. Okay, now here in our properties, we have different properties for diffuse, specular, illumination, and ambient. We also have shine, reflection, roughness, bump, opacity, and refraction. We're going to go through those in just a second. Now, clicking on one of these, we also have presets. So if I click here on my little down arrow, now you can see we have many different presets that are loaded within Photoshop. Some of these are like glass, some of these are metal, some of these are like copper and gold and supposed to be like grass and things like that. So we have presets here, okay, and basically all these presets do are define. All right, let's go ahead and click on this one here. So we're going to click on this preset here, and now we're going to give all of our different objects. So the Flurn, this Flurn texture here, it's made up of a few different sides. So each of the side gets its own material. Let's go ahead and make sure that each of the sides is getting the same material. All right, cool. That looks cool. Let's go ahead and hit render and see how that looks. It's just going to take a little while, but we do have some transparency built into here as well. All right, so it's going to kind of figure out what this actually looks like. It's going to look like kind of like green frosted glass. All right, and this will just take a minute to actually render. All right, we're going to come back when it's fully rendered here. All right, guys, our render just finished up. Let's go ahead and jump back into Photoshop. So now you can see our Flurn text actually looks like green glass, and we've got some transparency here and the shadows, and you can even see the shadows through there, which is really, really cool. So let's go ahead and we're on our layer 1, which is our Flurn logo here. Okay, let's go ahead and click on our layer 1 front inflation material again. There we go, and now we can see this is basically our material. So let's go ahead and go back to a standard material, and we'll show you guys basically like how these materials work. Now you can load materials in Photoshop simply by clicking on this gear icon and going into load materials. Okay, and it's going to go to, basically it's going to tell you can download and install them by going to 3D and get more content. So you can hit OK there and basically load materials in here, or you can go to 3D there and get more content, which is basically going to take you online to a website where you can download more materials. Okay, so here we have diffuse. Now this is our main color of our object. So you can see if I click on diffuse and then go to like a blue color here, this is basically the color of our object. All right. Next we have our specular, and this has to do with the highlight color of our object. Now on a round object, you're going to see a lot more specular highlights than you would here, but there you can see as I start to bring my intensity up of my color a little bit. All right, there we go. We've got some of our highlight kind of highlight color coming through our blue color. There we go. And here's a little preview. So basically you get the idea. This is our main color here and our highlight color. Now if you want to make it actually look like it's lit, like from the inside here, you can give it a color. You can give it we'll just go to white here, and I can bring my intensity, and this is going to make our light actually look like it's being lit from the inside. So this would be like a light source, for instance. We're going to hit cancel there. Okay, and then we just have ambient light, and this is basically just like affects the entire material here with a little bit of ambient color. All right, and generally we're going to have that set to black. All right, next, all these are pretty self-explanatory. We have our shininess, and here you can see a preview of what our shininess does. Here we can see with no shine, we just basically are seeing our specular color. Our specular highlights go smaller and smaller and smaller as we bring up our shininess. There we go. Reflection at 0, this is basically like dirt, non-reflective. At 100%, this is like chrome, which is going to be extremely reflective. Now, when we have flat objects like this, you're not going to see so much reflection, but when you start to have curves and things like that, you see a lot more reflection there. Okay, your roughness basically has to do with how, there we go, we can see our edge there, with how rough our edge is. So here we have like a very smooth surface, and this just brings up our surface making a little bit more rough. Okay, now our bump is basically the same idea, except for we can actually load in different textures to our bump. Now we're going to click here, all right, and we're going to go to, for instance, new texture. There we go, and now I have a new texture. So if I decide to, let's see, draw my name, hit Command S to save this, and then close it out, now I'm going to actually see that becomes a bump map on my texture. Okay, let's go ahead and give this like a real quick render to see what that looks like. Basically, it's going to create highlights and shadows in those areas. Okay, rendering this as like, this basically would be a bump. Now, if you did have something that is a little bit more like complex, like for instance, you could do like, if you were trying to do something like asphalt, and then you had a picture of the asphalt with it had the highlights and the shadows of each individual rock, it would actually make it look like it has the bump basically of that picture. So you can use basically photographs as bump maps, which is pretty cool. So here we can see it's just kind of rendering out the highlights and shadows of that. All right, let's go ahead and hit escape again. Now in this case, bump map, we're going to go to remove texture. We don't need a bump map on there. Okay, opacity is the same like a layer opacity. Basically makes it less visible or more visible. Okay, and refraction has to do with how it actually like bends light. So as light sources enter it, like think of like a glass of water, light kind of enters it from one direction and like bends it around. That's why you see a bit of distortion. That's how refraction works there. All right, cool. So those are our different materials within Photoshop. Now, we've got an idea of how our material works. We've got an idea of how our 3D works. The last thing we're going to take a look at, let's go ahead and close this up here. All right, we know our default camera. We can go ahead and click on that. There we go. Cool. And our infinite light. Next, we can see basically here's our organization within 3D. So here's our entire scene. This is going to filter by meshes, filter by my materials, and just by lights. So for instance, if you just want to see your mesh, okay, now in this case, our mesh is the flern, that's basically the objects, okay? Your materials, so in this case, these are all of our different materials here, okay, and our lights. So for instance, if you have a very complicated scene, you can just go ahead and change those in there. All right, guys. Well, that basically gives us a basic understanding of our, there we go, of how 3D works in Photoshop. Now, all of this is basically just like showing you guys how the 3D and the properties actually work. Now we're going to jump in and show you a quick example of how 3D printing works in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and click on our layer 1 here. Now, in order to 3D print, we can't have any transparency in our image. We can see we have a lot of transparency here. So let's go ahead and click on our materials here. We're going to give each of our materials, there we go, just a standard material here. Okay, there we go. Click on each of these and almost done here. All right, great. Now, when you're 3D printing in Photoshop, basically you want your 3D print to line perfectly up on the ground because a 3D printer works by creating different layers of whatever object it is, whether it's a plastic or use like some substrates like starch or gypsum or something like that. They basically just print them out in layers. So you want that laying flat on the ground. Okay, so in order to do that, let's go ahead and click on our object here. Okay, now we're going to go to our coordinates. I'm going to take our, there we go, our image. We're going to go ahead and reset all of our coordinates here. And then I'm going to take our X and we're going to type in 90 there. And that's going to go ahead and make sure it's flat on the ground. And I'm going to have set move to ground, and that's going to go ahead and put it on the ground plane. All right, so there we go. That's our flern, and you can see it is on the ground now. Okay, now to get to our 3D printing, we're going to go to our scene. Okay, and then here we have our coordinates. This is our settings within the scene, and then we have a printer with a little plus icon. So we're going to go to our 3D print now, and here we're going to see this is an actual preview of what our 3D print is going to look like. Now, here we have some options. We can have this print to, in this case, if you have a local 3D printer, like if you have a 3D printer, that's awesome. We can also send it off to like Shapeways or Sculpteo. If you guys are in the United States, Sculpteo is what you would choose. Basically, you would choose Sculpteo. You can choose what different ceramic you'd like. So like if you want it, or sorry, choose your different material. So if you wanted to have it be printed out of pink plastic, you could do that. Or orange painted resin, you could have it do that as well. All right, you could even do a sterling silver, which is pretty cool. All right, your detail level you can change here from low, medium, and high. Printer volume and surface detail. So if you wanted to print or not print, like bump maps, for instance, we're going to turn that off. We don't want that to be printed there. And if you did have opacity, you could turn that off there as well. All right, so basically what this is going to tell me is this is going to print to Sculpteo. Okay, now in this case, of course, you can do a local. If you have your own 3D printer, you just do this in-house. Let's say we're going to print to Sculpteo in sterling silver. Well, let's just choose something a little bit more reasonable. We're just going to do black plastic. It'll be a lot. There we go. It'll be a lot less expensive. Okay, cool. So we're almost done here. Now what we're going to do is click on this icon here, and it's going to basically convert everything we need to, and it's going to build up our form. So basically it's converting, our regular object to something that's ready to be printed out in 3D. All right, so this is just going to take a second here, and then it's going to ask us, we can go ahead and save out a file and then upload it to their website and have it printed, which is really, really cool. All right, so we see a little message here. It says estimated prices may differ from final purchase price. Hit OK. Then we're going to see a preview of what our actual 3D print is going to look like. So we can see it's black plastic. We can just make sure, yep, okay, it's spelled correctly. Everything looks good. It's going to be printing to Sculpteo in this case, and our estimated price is $49. And here's the size of our print, which is really, really cool. Now I'm going to hit export here. It's basically going to export out an STL file, .zip, okay? And I already exported one of these out, so we don't need to hit export again. But basically, once you have that exported out, you can hit cancel there. Then you can just simply go to their website. All right, let's go to Sculpteo. Let's go back here real quick. And basically, you upload your design, they're going to print it, and then you receive it in the mail. So simply upload a design. You got to create an account. So I haven't done that just yet. But basically, take that STL file, and that's all you need. And they're going to basically send you that 3D print in the mail, which is really, really cool. All right, guys. Now, earlier when we started off in this section, we said that 3D in Photoshop basically has like two very practical uses. One is for 3D printing, so we just showed you guys how to do that. And two is for actually creating graphics in Photoshop. So you saw like our Flurn, like the Flurn logo with the shadow and everything like that, looked pretty cool. All right, now we're going to jump in and show you a quick example of how we're going to use some of these graphics to actually enhance one of our photos in Photoshop. All right, guys, let's go ahead and open up our next image for this section. So we're going to hit Controller Command O. In this case, we're going to go to 053D.tiff and hit Open. F4 full screen. Okay, now a brief tour of how we actually made this image. Our subject actually was jumping on a trampoline for this photo, and we've got a couple of lights, camera right there, that are actually creating this nice shadow on the background, which is pretty cool. So here's our subject. We have our subject and her shadows separated out already. And then we have our background, okay, which is just two solid fill adjustment layers. So what I want to do with this image basically is to create a couple of like really simple shapes that are going to be like floating in space there, and then creating shadows on a background. And I want to try to get the shadows to look a lot like the shadows from our subject. So basically you just try to match photographic shadows and have it look like our subject is floating around with different like 3D shapes, which it's going to be really cool. Let's go ahead and jump in and get it done. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to go to Window, down to 3D. Okay. Now I'm going to create a new layer here, and we're going to go down to Mesh from Preset. All right. So our source here, there we go. It's going to be on the selected layers. So make sure you create a new layer here. Okay. We're going to just create a cube to start. So let's go ahead and hit Create there. All right. We're going to convert the colors. There's our cube, and I want to take my view and just put it back to our standard view. I don't need to jump into the 3D view just now. All right, cool. So here we see, again, just like we saw in our last image, we have our scene, our current view, so we can rotate our current view around. All right, pretty cool. And we have our cube, which we can rotate our cube around as well. All right, and we have our light as well. So let's go ahead. We're going to go to Window and down to Properties. All right, let's go ahead and put 3D right over there and use our spacebar. All right, we'll just do a top to bottom stack there so we can see what we're doing. Okay, great. Now our cube itself, let's go ahead and change the scale here. We're going to go ahead and reset the width and the height. Okay, now let's go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. So we're going to click right here on the center cube there and go to Scale Uniformly. All right, so we're going to click and just drag that down there. Okay, now in this case, you can see our shadow. All right, we're going to click on our cube itself. So our shadow, you can see, is supposed to be basically on the ground plane. Well, let's make sure we go ahead and reset the rotation of our cube. And I'm going to hit Move to Ground. All right, so the cube is technically sitting on the ground. Now, I want the ground to look like it's the wall behind our subject. So we're going to go to our scene. Okay, we're going to go to our view. Current view. We're going to go to our view, and I'm going to go to top. There we go. And now our cube is basically looking like we're looking from the top of our cube. So we have our document wall is now basically going to be what's catching the shadow of our cube. Okay, well, let's go ahead and click on our first cube. In this case, we want to change our X to go left and right. If we change our Y, it's going to start basically scaling out from the top. All right, so you can see here in our scene, there we go. It's just basically lifting off the ground. So changing your Y values basically just has it lift off the ground there. All right, cool. Let's go back to our current view. We're going to go back to a top view. All right, and now back to our cube. You know what? We're going to go ahead and change our scale just a little bit. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate that around too. So our cube, let's go ahead and rotate our cube just to give it a little bit more interest. All right. And now we're going to click on our infinite light. And I want my infinite light to look a lot more like the light that's actually in our image. Okay. So my infinite light's basically what's going to cast a shadow on our image. Now I'm going to click on our environment here. Okay. And here where it says shadow, yes, I do want a shadow. The color of the shadow, in this case, I don't want that to be black. In this case, I want it to actually be this kind of pink color. So we're going to click here, and we're going to bring this down and make it a nice dark pink color. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and click on our scene. I'm going to click on Render real quick and see if that did it for us. All right, so we should see a bit more of a pink color there. All right, let's give it a little bit more color. So we'll go to our environment. All right. Oh, sorry. Click on your shadows here on your ground plane. All right. There we go. And we'll just make that a little bit more saturated. I'm kind of, you know what? We can actually just match the shadow color here from the other shadow, which is actually pretty cool. All right. This color, let's go ahead and just bring back, all right, to how it was when we started. All right. Bring up a little bit of ambient light. There we go. And now our infinite light, we can go ahead and take that and make it just a little bit darker. All right. We also want to increase our softness of our shadow a little bit because we can see the softness of the shadow there. Cool. Let's go ahead and hit the render key and see what that looks like now. Oh, pretty cool. You can see the shadow actually does look like that other shadow color, which I think is really cool. All right, let's hit escape now. Now we want to create one more light because we have two shadows on our background. Okay. So we're going to go down to our light here. We're going to go to New Infinite Light. There we go. And in this case, we're going to put it in kind of a similar place here. We want it to be a little bit farther away. Okay. Now, what we want to do is bring our intensity down just a little bit. Okay, because I'm trying to match that shadow there. All right. And we're going to make it a little bit fuzzier as well. All right. So let's hit the render key and see what that looks like. All right, pretty cool, except I can't really see that second shadow. So our infinite light there, let's just be sure to turn our color up just a little bit there. And there we go. So once I do this, basically I've got my lights in place and they're looking good. Yeah, I like how that looks. Pretty nice. So now my lights are in place. I'm going to go to View. We're going to go down to Show, and I'm going to click on the 3D lights. We're just going to turn this off because I don't need to see my 3D lights for right now. All right, View, Show. All right. Oh, okay, well, I guess they're still going to show up in our scene. We can just click off of them, and then they won't show up. All right, guys, so we have our cube, and we have two infinite lights that are creating basically the same shadows in my image. So let's go ahead and duplicate that cube and make it look like our subject is floating with a bunch of cubes. It's going to look really cool. Okay, so jumping back in, we're going to right-click on our cube here. And I'm going to go down to Duplicate Objects. So we're going to duplicate our cube. Okay, now here to move the cube around, you can simply click on any of these. There we go. You can simply click on any of these icons here. So this is going to move on the x-axis. Here we're going to move on the y. And here we're going to move on the z. Now you can do the same thing within your Properties menu with your coordinates. So I can move this one on the x-axis. Okay, I can move it on the y-axis, which is going to be farther or closer to my ground plane. And we can move this on the z-axis as well. I can change my rotation here. I can change my x rotation, the y rotation, and the z rotation. Cool, let's have it be right there. And I can also change my scale. So in this case, it's going to scale uniformly. Okay, we can simply click here and we can unclick this. And if I want to just scale on the x-axis or y-axis, we can have it do that as well. All right, in this case, we're going to click on Uniform Scaling. All right, that looks pretty cool. Now let's go right-click here. We're going to go to Duplicate Objects again. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and start moving this around. So let's go ahead and scale this a little bit larger. All right, and I want to bring this out a little bit. There we go, and there we go. Maybe bring it up. And I'd like to give this a bit of rotation as well. All right, and that's going to look like the shadow is actually on our subject, which is going to be really cool. All right, let's go ahead and duplicate this layer again. So we're going to go to Duplicate Objects. All right, we're going to move this. Yep, maybe have this one a little bit closer. All right, we're going to change our X and our Z. Let's move this a little bit closer, maybe look like halfway into the ground plane even. There we go. All right, and we'll go ahead. You know what? I'm going to pull that back out just a little bit. All right, and let's go ahead and duplicate. I want to duplicate that small one again. So that small one is right here. Let's go ahead and right-click and duplicate that one again. All right, and we're going to move that right down here. Okay, and then I'm going to just go ahead and rotate this around. I want to make sure each of them is rotated to, like, you know, we're working in 3D here. You know, we don't want them to look like they're at all like the same rotation, right? It's like, why would you, you don't want them to look like they're, two-dimensional shapes, especially if they're not. There we go. All right, we'll rotate this guy around there, and cool. Put this there. We're going to do a couple of more of these. Let's go ahead and duplicate that one. All right. Let's go ahead and scale it down a little bit. So this, at this point, basically I'm just creating a composition that I like. All right, let's go ahead and duplicate that one more time. All right, there we go. We'll make it nice and small. And put this one closer to the ground. All right, and I'm going to do one more. It's kind of addictive here. All right. Cool. And bring this over top of our subject here. And now our... Cool. And we'll go ahead and rotate this around a little bit more. All right, and let's make sure to rotate this one around too so they don't look the same. All right, this looks great. All right, guys, so now we've got a bunch of three-dimensional shapes on our image. Let's go ahead and render this out and see how it looks without any textures defined on our cubes. Our image is done rendering. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so jumping back in, I think this looks awesome. Now, there's one thing that I would like in this case, because we do have such a cool color scheme going on with this image, I'd like if our cubes, instead of just being this gray color, I'd like it if they actually represented some of the colors that were in our scene. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start off with one of our cubes here. Let's go ahead and turn this one off and on. Okay, we have our front material here. All right, and now let's go ahead and see what different types of materials we can use. So I recommend starting off with just a standard material here. You can always change the color here, but I do recommend starting off with a standard. There we go. So in this case, let's go ahead and open this up, and we're going to have all of these basically be the exact same material. And what I would recommend doing is, before you make any changes, just see how this renders. You know, because sometimes things are going to be like a little bit too shiny or a little bit too reflective, or you know, all kinds of different properties that you don't necessarily, that you're unable to account for. I mean, just looking at this little preview here, it's kind of tough to tell exactly what this is going to look like when it's actually rendered. All right, so we're going to make each of our different sides that's exact same material. Then I'm going to hit render here. We're going to let it render out for just a minute here, just to make sure that it is doing what we want. All right, and then from there, we can always just change our diffuse color to the colors that we want in Photoshop. All right. Cool. Yep, and that's rendered out enough to where I feel pretty confident that does look pretty good. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit escape here. Now, I'd like my shadows levels to be a little bit brighter. They were just a little bit dark. So I'm going to go to my environment, and we're going to bring up our brightness of our scene just a little bit. All right, and that's going to bring up our shadow levels for the entire scene. All right, let's go back to our cube here. Now our diffuse color, in this case, I'd like it to be this kind of like, there we go. I'd like it to be that color. I'm choosing colors from my actual document here. Okay, and now I can actually go here and I can create a new, let's go to a new material. All right, and I'm just going to call this Cube 1. And it's going to show up all the way here in the bottom. So now I'm just going to click on each side and go to Cube 1. There we go. And make sure each side, now the back sides, it really doesn't matter actually that much because I can't see them. But let's go ahead and make sure to take all 6 sides here and put it to Cube 1. There we are. Very cool. And hit the render key. And now we should start to get something that starts to make a little bit more sense with our image. So our shadow color we already dialed in, and now we're working on our actual cube color. All right. Cool. Yeah, I think that's going to be really, really nice when we're done with it. All right. So it's doing a rough render now, which kind of tells me, okay, yeah, this is about what we're going to get. Basically, as the render continues to go, it's just going to get refined. Where you see all these little, like this texture and stuff like that, basically it's going to just continue to smooth out over time. So I know now that that texture at least does work for me. So what I'm going to do next is basically change the texture for all of my different cubes, and then we're going to be done with our image, and we're going to be good to go. Our render just finished up. Let's go ahead and take a look. All right, jumping back into Photoshop, I think this looks so cool. So we have our different blocks, and we chose the colors from our actual background. So this is one of those cases where I'm probably going to go in here and spend maybe another hour or so kind of changing everything around and getting it just right. But here you have a really good idea of how to actually use 3D in Photoshop. And I think this image looks great. Guys, thanks so much for watching this section on 3D in Photoshop. So whether you guys are 3D printing or creating graphics or 3D extrusions of your logo in Photoshop, Photoshop is a great program to use 3D. If you're looking to do things like create a movie or a video game, look into other programs like Maya or 3D Studio Max. All right, guys, thanks so much. We'll see you in the next section. Bye, everyone.